So welcome back from the break. I'm moderating this next session again, so I know y'all are super pumped. We're going to be talking zero trust, another topic that's front and center for a lot of us here. We've got a great panel, and we're going to be talking about what actually is going to put zero trust into practice, from quantifying asset risk to aligning with evolving mandates and using automation to reduce friction across the board. So here with me on this next panel, I have Daryl Haegley, Technical Director for Control Systems and Cyber Resilience at the U.S. Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Carter, Operations Officer with the Marine Corps Cyberspace Operations Group, Shailesh Athalye, Senior Vice President of Product Management at Qualys. So please join me in welcoming you to the stage. All right, let's get started. So to kick us off, zero trust has evolved from just a buzzword to a mandate. How are each of your organizations translating the zero trust principles into day-to-day operational discussions? Jason, you want to get us started?
Well, first of all, good morning. Thank you for having me. From the Marine Corps perspective, so translating it from a mandate into day-to-day operations. So modernization is a constant in IT. So whatever the new technology is, but it's not just buying new technology, how we're translating that. Zero trust based off the principles, least privilege access, single identity, multi-factor authentication, continuous monitoring. It's not necessarily having those things in pillars of excellence. It's how you integrate them into a holistic system. So as we onboard the next iteration of technology, making sure that it integrates fully with our entire ecosystem.
Daryl, what about you?
Well, thanks. So in the Air Force and Space Force, we depend upon power and water for 100% of our missions. I like to ask the audience, who here used power or water today? Not everybody. Apparently, we got some robots in the room. And applying zero trust to OT is kind of this out-of-the-box thinking, or it was a little while ago. And to assume that you have an adversary in that network already is just totally out of the normal thinking of someone who's operating these systems that implied that you needed to have trust and you need to have instant access. So we're working on how do we apply zero trust with that mentality. Right now, just a quick summary, like over 75% of all our OT systems are not networked. Who here wants to have that in their environments? Who here will now try and get that in their environments? Like nobody. Who thinks that they could automate all that in there with the technology they have, and that we should sole source to them? I'm surprised I haven't seen a lot more hands there. So typically, Daryl can solve all this, just connect it all, and we can apply it all. So we've got some ways to go to apply some of these specific zero trust activities in the OT environment.
Great. Shailesh, from your perspective, how are you seeing organizations really apply zero trust principles into their operations?
Yeah, thanks for that. My experience is a little different than Lieutenant Carter and Daryl, who are the expert in operationalizing. They've been seeing it at ground level and at the strategy level, how to implement and operationalize. My experience has been creating the products and technologies essentially to help customers address some of these challenges. Talking with commercial customers as well as the federal and the public sector companies, we are definitely seeing that it's sort of a crawl, walk, run approach. And Daryl actually made that point. We are seeing that the organizations or the agencies are looking into the executive order 14028, I believe, and the CSAS maturity model. Then the second part they are absolutely looking at doing is what should it be based on, right? Would it be based on the environment or the network? Would it be based on the identity? Would it be based on the data? Would it be based on the applications? So for sure, they're taking the stock at it, because a lot of questions which are coming to us is, how do we actually inventory all of this? How do we actually know where our data resides, applications reside, et cetera? That's the part we are definitely seeing is definitely moving from the buzzword to actually putting some steps, mapping it to the right mechanics.
Sure. And my next question is also for you again, Shailesh. You've worked with multiple agencies, organizations. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen when quantifying and acting on asset level risk in real time? And how can automation potentially help address some of those challenges?
Wow, Anna, that's a pretty loaded
question. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're starting strong.
Yeah, awesome. So if I just step back a bit, right? Like the risk management obviously like requires you to, one, like you talked about it, like quantify this risk. Second part is the communication part of that, and then the third part is the reduction part of that. We see from the quantification part, there are obviously a couple of challenges we can think about if you segregate that. One is the technology or the technical challenges, but the second are really the operational challenges a lot of agencies face. Because even when you look at driving it in terms of the zero trust objectives, at the end of the day, the operational challenge is how you're going to communicate that to maybe say CISA, maybe to your executives, maybe to other agencies, because they're still driven by the compliance frameworks. So when you're driving some of the strategies, how to communicate that I feel is the one operational challenge. On the technical side, I think Daryl touched based on that. The first part, we definitely are saying where your zero trust and the relevant quantification of risk would be based on. So you need to know all your assets, where they're based on, if you know all your OT environments, but do you actually know all your assets which are in cloud maybe? The second part of that, and that's where the challenges happen, when you get all of their security findings on vulnerability, misconfiguration, identities related issues, it becomes a lot of noise very, very fast. You need to take care of all CISA caves, right? Somebody talked about it. You need to take care of all ransomware, China attribution related exposures. Then you need to actually apply, the problem is the threat intel and your agency's context, whether this is internet facing, whether this is really critical for me to actually have no impact on water system, which is actually connected to my electric system, etc. That business context, correlating with threat intel, mapping to these exposures, and then really boiling down to what's really important for you, that I feel becomes one of the biggest quantification challenge. Then the third piece is obviously you can choose a model where you'll see like CVSS versus the way you want to quantify that in itself, the model is the third other challenge.
Does that sound familiar to both of you?
Yes. So for cyber risk, especially in the OT environment, I just want to ask again the folks here, who do you think is best to quantify that risk? Do you think it should be the OT system owners and operators who best can quantify and understand cyber risk to the OT environment? Or do you think it should be the IT cyber professionals best to understand the cyber risk to the OT environment? Or do you think we should just let AI figure it out on their own? Or are we just going to hope for some rainbow unicorns to come out of the woodwork and just do it, right? So this is kind of an interesting intersection of who is best to do that and how do we automate it. As I said, most of our systems are already not connected, so we take a laptop, a person takes a laptop and walks it out to the OT system, runs a security stack run, and comes back, right? So and integrating the risk, understanding the dependencies. A lot of missions don't fully appreciate that water is really important to the HVAC system, to their servers. And being able to quantify all that into some picture that a commander or a decision maker can make a decision on is yet to be made.
And I think Daryl, coming from the IT side, I think the IT side will say, yes, we understand all the cyber risk that is involved in OT, which is a fallacy. But from the Marine Corps perspective, so as the cybersecurity service provider that we are at the MCOG, so part of that is taking on some of the OT. It's not just taking on the cybersecurity for the OT, so it's not just the IT side of it, we're looking at it, we're protecting it because we don't fully understand it. So it's partnering with our installations commands, making sure with the OT professionals, how do we blend that together? How do we do that from a CSSP side? And also leveraging the expertise on the OT side. to actually understand what that risk is, what anomalous activity looks like, because in the IT and OT world, they look very different. And then just kind of overall, I think back to a point that Shailesh made, understanding your environment is probably the greatest thing that you can do moving towards zero trust. You have to inventorying your entire environment. That's a large task, but just understanding it as we've evolved through the history of networks, even in the commercial world. Whenever there is a merger, you take on someone else's network. And so you have to modernize your network to the level that yours is. That's the same way in the DoD. There's throughout time, people stand up their own networks. And as you get towards zero trust, it's more about the holistic environment. So you have to go to a convergence towards one platform, towards one network, towards one identity. And I think that's the direction the Marine Corps is moving in. I think that's largely a direction the department's moving in.
Jason, obviously the military works in a very high stakes environment. So how are you thinking about operationalizing and institutionalizing zero trust without slowing down that mission readiness?
So that's a tough question. So it's how do you modernize the complete infrastructure of not just the Marine Corps, but of the DoD without slowing down anything? It takes a very methodical approach to it. So as I mentioned, converging networks. There are hundreds of networks across the DoD. Now largely services are reducing the number of networks. And that goes after a number of frameworks, a number of mandates that are out there. But from the Marine Corps' perspective, so as we consolidate networks, it's getting down to single identity, multi-factor authentication. We're using the same source of truth for everything. So that helps with the visibility, that helps with the inventory, that helps realizing where your data is so you can protect your data end to end, because that's what zero trust is all about. Knowing who your users are, knowing where your endpoints are, knowing the endpoints and where the data lakes are, and how to protect that data in between. So doing that in a methodical method as you converge onto a single platform or a more cohesive platform, I think that's a way to do it without slowing down. You can't just pull the carpet out from under and say, we are implementing all these things in the next 6 months. That's not realistic. So I think that's our perspective on it.
Anything
So
you add?
I really like this question because it reminds me of just a great point everyone should really acknowledge. The intelligence community has heard back from the adversary trying to get onto networks that have implemented zero trust. And they are frustrated. So zero trust works when you can implement it. So that is the good news. And we've recognized that the IT version of implementing zero trust will not work in the OT space. And in fact, over the last several months, government and industry has partnered together to create its own OT zero trust fan chart, if you will, which will have 114 activities, not the 152 zero trust IT activities. I mean, there's a couple of appreciable differences that we're looking to implement in the OT space that makes that difference. So from like devices, from the device pillar, there's some that you can't do an active pinging to get information. It has to be a passive, right? So that has to be part of a consideration. From the data tagging perspective, you may not be able to go into an operational environment. You may only be able to just get information that's stored at a data historian via like a one-way data diode, right? So this is done in the nuclear facilities all the time. And then the last one is the visibility and data analytics. You may need to wait a whole year to get energy relevant data about what's happening to an HVAC system or how it responds in summer, winter, and the whole year. You can't just take 1 month and say that's it. So those are some of the ways that we're going to be looking at OT specifically in implementing zero trust.
Great. And Daryl, when it comes to cyber physical systems and control systems, how are you adapting zero trust strategies to environments that traditionally prioritize availability over segmentation? So we have to recognize that just because we have things
disconnected and sitting out there does not mean it qualifies as zero trust on its own. We recognize we need data. It's been talked about today, but there are folks who don't think that data is valuable. So we've been struggling with, how much data is relevant. Do you need data all the time, 24/7, every 3 seconds about a thermostat? Or, can you offload that into a historian and get that later? We recognize availability is really important in the OT networks. I have had a number of people say, Daryl, we don't need to worry about cyber too much. We'll just disconnect that Ethernet cable and just go press the green button. Well, okay, but have you ever rehearsed that? Do you have the people to keep it going? And what if you can still get in there another way? So those are some of the considerations we have as we're trying to, again, implement zero trust.
Great. So zero trust often requires both cultural and technical shifts. So are there any strategies that have helped drive adoption across teams that may have been resistant or slow to adapt? I can open it up to the group. Anyone want to take that first? Jason?
Yes.
Putting you on the spot.
Cultural adoption, there have been a lot of mandates that have come forward and across varying different levels of the department. But I think one of the things that we did that was done right was zero trust. It was kind of the top down. So yes, I'm the operations officer of the MCOG. Previously, my job up at IC4 at the Pentagon, I wrote the Marine Corps zero trust strategy. Largely based off the DoD zero trust strategy. So it got buy-in from the top down. It's back when zero trust was a buzzword. Everyone knew kind of what it was, but kind of at building or developing that strategy at the DoD level. And then once that strategy is complete, everyone looks at it, it's like, okay, these are a lot of words, don't understand the technical details of it, and how do I apply it to my system? Because across the DoD, across the federal government, everyone has unique systems, whether it's IT, whether it's OT. But then it's those governance bodies and everyone the technical forums that kind of sit down at the action officer level with all the technicians and explained, here are the NIST security controls that need to be implemented for this type of technology. So it wasn't just a department level strategy. It got down into the ones and zeros of how do we actually technically implement this at the level. And then it's kind of bridging that gap in between.
Yeah, go for it.
So I really like what Jaden said. A number of people are all concerned, oh no, another buzzword, another whole set of requirements. However, I think there's a number of things that we can take credit for doing within zero trust already. So for example, within the NIST security controls, which we've all supposed to be doing the risk management framework anyway, AC2, account management, one of the things is Daryl should not be able to use the same username and password 10 years after I left the organization. It's a mandatory requirement, and we should be implementing that security control. Well, turns out it's also a zero trust function, right? So there are security controls, I contend, we can take credit for doing some of the security control functions as we've aligned a lot of what we can do there. So I think we're doing probably about 20% of some of these things already. And I know we've heard, some in the DoD say, well, we're not going to be able to do this till 2030. I think we can get to it a lot sooner by taking credit for some of the things we're already doing.
Yeah, I love that. Shailesh, anything you've seen or any recommendations from your perspective?
I think they covered them both pretty well. I think from our side, our CISO decides, Jonathan, hey, we got to have the zero trust in place for nobody in our FedRAMP pod should get the access from outside in. We just got to do that. It's pretty simple, I guess, for Jonathan, right?
Yeah, simple. Well, let's hop back to automation a little bit. Obviously, it's often looked at as a silver bullet, but I'm curious, where do you all think it might be underutilized and how can it be implemented more strategically in certain areas? Jason, do you want to start?
Yeah, so automation, automation AI, and a lot of other things, the silver bullet that's going to fix everything, But looking at it from across the DoD, across all organizations, there's a limited amount of manpower and limited amount of resources. So how do you address those concerns? Well, from the McCog's perspective, we run our security operations center, our network operations center. Looking at the number of alerts, we have millions of alerts daily, and just think of the factors of that times a week and for the month. And that's non-compliance, that's anomalous activity, that's adversarial activity, and you just don't have the people to look at it. And some of those, it doesn't take a human in the loop every time to resolve something. As you're going towards zero trust, you're talking auto remediation. So identifying those alerts, making sure your system is integrated. But it's those automated alerts. We can run playbooks on certain anomalous activity that either blocks it, black holes it, or it mitigates it to some perspective. And then when you get towards the adversarial activity, that's when you kind of need that human in the loop to look at it. So I think it's I wouldn't say it's underutilized, but I think we're capitalizing on the resources that we have. So we apply automation where it's low risk. And as you move up the risk spectrum, that's when you need to include humans in the loop. So we make sure that it's addressing the concerns the right way.
Yeah, I think that there's a great opportunity in the OT space to apply artificial intelligence and automation, especially because a lot of the OT doesn't vary that much, right? So think of the thermostats in this conference room. It's supposed to be in a certain range, and it should not deviate from that. So understanding anomalous behavior, it should be pretty straightforward for a tool like that. And I would contend that we should not be being charged the same amount for an AI tool that monitors thermostats that we do for monitors everyone's laptop and access to the internet, right? So I haven't proved this yet, but I just it was just kind of interesting as we've done a pilot activity and we had a AI tool sitting on this thing, and I just think it was bored, right? There's not a lot of activity here. And should we be treating it? Should we have the same pricing models for this? I mean, we don't pay the same for a surgeon than a nurse practitioner, which I would contend for some of these OT environments, it could be really routine. But if we connect a lot of them and they're in pretty critical environments, that's a little different story.
Yeah, I'll probably divide that into two parts, right? Like, I think where we are directly enforcing or remediating certain things using automation, probably that's not gonna get you a lot of friends, from the IT side, if you actually go ahead and remediate some of those things. Where the automation could actually be leveraged really well to get the teams together, your IT counterpart, your cloud counterpart, is the prioritization, right? Like, nobody wants more things to be fixed, but everybody wants the right things to be fixed. And if the automation could help there in bringing the context you were talking about, that, hey, I have all of these exposures coming in, like vulnerabilities, misconfig, identity issues. Can I bring in the context of my assets and my threat intel and then prioritize that? That will help you show to your IT counterparts, look, these other 70% things I'm not giving to you because of automation. These 30 things are non-negotiable, and that will actually take care of a lot of operational things. The second interesting part is really my pet peeve, right? Like, how many of you are using the best of endpoint security tool? Everybody, right? Like, almost everybody is using some of the endpoint security tools, and then every year we keep on hearing 80% of the organizations face repetition of attacks. Now, why is that happening, right? At the end of the day, the attacker is exploiting the same thing what you are not patching or fixing, which attackers know, probably don't know, but you're not doing anything about it. So can actually automation be leveraged there? What is exploiting me, which I know, which could be underlying identity issue, vulnerability or misconfig? Can I actually put automation to fix that first? That could be a good step number one, I truly feel.
if I may, there's kind of a fun related OT story with automatically doing Windows patching. I mean, there was one in a hospital a couple years ago to where all the MRI machines reset in the middle of the day and people were in the MRI machines. So, understanding that context and when you apply automation is very important in the OT environment.
Yeah, usage for sure. And to his point, absolutely right. Many a times the systems are critical. And a lot of times they say that cybersecurity is always possibility, right? Like the possibility you will get breached. If you apply patch, it's 100% sure that machine is going to get rebooted. Now that's what your IT team is saying. But I would really encourage you all to go in your environment and check 70% of your exposures are on the endpoints or the assets which are not really critical, but they are increasing your debt of vulnerabilities and exposures. A quick win is to use automation there to fix them. Nobody's machine has ever gone down by patching Chrome, right? I guarantee that. But keep OT environment, your critical environment, for your time for testing those patches by working with your IT team.
So for Jason and Daryl, how are you aligning your own zero trust implementation with the broader federal mandates while also accounting for the complexity of your own operational environments? That's also a big question and also very daunting, I'm sure.
Yes. So the DoD Zero Trust Strategy, I believe, came out 2 years ago now. So there were already congressional mandates. There are already mandates across the DoD that were kind of in motion. I don't think when the Zero Trust mandate or the Zero Trust strategy, that direction came out, I don't think it was in violent opposition to any mandates that are already out there. There's always going to be details at certain policy levels that need to be massaged over time. I think there's a number of mandates that are out there. Comply to Connect is one of them. And then you look at Zero Trust, the strategy and how Comply to Connect. Small differences, but really the policy, the intent, the direction that it's going in is really the same. And so I think because, as I said before, is you had that top level strategy, you had that top level buy-in, you have those forums, whether at the strategic level, at the operational level, at the tactical, technical level, you have those forums where everyone can get together, they can have the discussions, and you've seen some of the other mandates, some of the other policies that are driving those mandates kind of move over time a little bit to kind of align to that overall strategic vision. And that's one of the reasons the Marine Corps put out a Zero Trust strategy. DoD had their own, and so we were implementing ours, but instead of just creating a technical guide for the Marine Corps coming off the DoD strategy, it's that strategy allows you to align resources with technology, with people and everything to move in one direction.
Daryl?
Yeah, so after the DoD puts out its requirement, then the services have to provide their reports on how they're getting to it. I remember that the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, was briefing its CIO and CISO over a year ago, and they said, this is how we're going to meet Zero Trust. And then, to their credit, the CIO and CISO asked, well, what about OT? And the staffers said, we didn't think about that. So after that, we decided to create a group and focus on what are the non-enterprise IT means of getting to it. And so we've developed an implementation plan to get there with specific sub-implementation plans for each different set of OT, like security, fuel, logistics, facilities, power, water, and those sort of things. What would those look like in those kind of environments? So, kind of a specific sub-implementation plan for there. And we've done a couple of, we did one pilot activity that helped inform where we could and how we could implement some Zero Trust. And we have 2 others that we're working on, and we're going to be testing in a range at the Arnold Test Lab in Tennessee. So with those, we hope to inform which specific OT activities really apply to Zero Trust in those Air Force and Space Force environments.
Great. To wrap us up, one final question that's a bit lofty. So what's one mindset shift, capability, or investment you think agencies should really prioritize or focus on in the next year to really meaningfully advance the zero trust maturity? Shailesh, you want to kick us off?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Sorry, putting you on
All
the
right.
spot now.
So, I mean, I know I'm going to say something really cliche, but I feel probably moving from, because I hear a lot on both sides, even on the commercial side as well, more from the compliance-driven zero trust to, I would say, risk-based zero trust, I would highly recommend. For example, you could have number of CISA kevs, etc., the exposures on your assets, and those you need to obviously make sure that you take care of that when you report. But you know the context of your assets, your environment. If you actually build that in and bake that into your risk strategy and then drive the zero trust approach based on that, that will actually help you reduce the risk rather than just providing the reports for your auditors or executives.
Right. Daryl?
Yeah, so with those folks who have DraftKings or other kind of betting apps, you could almost bet what I'm about ready to say is just 3 words. What about OT? Right? So I would just ask everybody, because it's part of the culture shift that we kind of need to understand how do we apply that cyber to this space. I would encourage everyone to go back to the offices that now we are going back to, or the buildings in which your companies are operating out of, and go down and meet the building automation people and ask them if they're applying cyber to the building automation systems in which you all depend. I've always reminded of the great example of a Chamber of Commerce conference room exploit about over 10 years ago, to where there was a thermostat in the conference room that after 2 weeks of a big worldwide meeting on the jobs and focus of work for the next 20 years, the energy manager came by and looked at it and said, hey, there's something wrong with this thermostat. And when they finally had a cyber person look at it, it was digitally reprogrammed from a thermostat to a microphone. And the IP address of it going through an unsecured router was going to China. How cool is that? Right? So whose job is that? So I go back to, what about the OT?
Right. Jake?
I'd say, for me, I think there's 2 mind shifts. One's from a technical perspective, and then one's from kind of a people perspective. So from the technical perspective, I think it's part of the mind shift is we have largely had a group, so network focused, server focused, cloud focused, getting to the objective and state of zero trust. It's really it's the meshing of all of those. So your networking team, your services team, your cloud team, they're all going to be more integrated. The technologies are more reliant upon each other nowadays. So we have to bring all of those tribes together. And then from a people focus, zero trust is a buzzword to us in the IT and the OT industry, but just our normal user base, it's a completely foreign word. There are going to be changes that have to come from a user perspective. Users aren't ignorant to cyber. When you go to a restaurant, you don't unlock your phone and leave it on the table as you go to the bathroom. So they understand cybersecurity, they understand risk, but it's also how do we translate the changes that are coming because of zero trust to them. So moving from role-based access control, where you broadly had access to a lot of things, to attribute-based access control, where you only have access to the information that you are authorized to see. It's going to be a shift, and if we don't actually message that to the people that we are supporting, then I think it's going to be lost, and they're part of the solution to get to zero trust.
Great. Gentlemen, great conversation. Round of applause
Thank
for
you,
our
Anna.
awesome panel.
Thank you.